It's online, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they can record watching.
But no, it's quite next time. Next time I'll teach you that.
All right, good.
So I'll be introducing you. He's on his way here, and we have about 2 minutes left.
Okay, so he's going to come in.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm going to talk to you a bit just in case.
All right.
Okay, let's just get this started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Yvette Subramanian. I run the CITRIS Research Exchange here, and I would like to introduce you all to Nicola Lercari. Welcome to our web viewers. As you know, we have the 3 other CITRIS campuses, Davis, Merced, and Santa Cruz. They gather to watch these talks as well. So welcome, everybody. And everything with the lunch that you're having right now here is compostable, so please compost into the green bins at the end. Thank you for that. And I have a few announcements before we introduce today's speaker. This Friday, please join us here at 4 p.m. for the ITS CITRIS Resilience talk by Richard Murray from Caltech. His talk's going to be on autonomous vehicles and networked control systems, and there's a flyer in the back that has more information about that one. There are 3 weeks left until the Big Ideas pre-proposal deadline, which is on November 16th. So if you are interested in that, if you're a student and you have an idea, please go to bigideas.berkeley.edu. They are going to be having a pre-proposal writing and advising workshop on November 1st at 5 p.m. over in B100 Blum. It's also going to be on Skype. So the Big Ideas is a contest that's open to students from all 10 UC campuses. So everyone who's here on the other CITRIS campuses, any UC campus can participate. And on November 16th at 6 p.m., also in this room, the CITRIS Foundry is hosting a demo day to celebrate the graduation of the fall 2015 cohort. So you can find out more about that online. And the demo day will basically be an opportunity for the teams to show their presentations of their companies and discuss the experience of being part of the CITRIS Foundry. So if you're interested in that, please look online. And now I'd like to introduce today's speaker. We have today Nicola Lercari. He is an assistant professor of World Heritage at UC Merced. And his work focuses on digital preservation of heritage, cross-media systems for museums, and the analytical and interpretive role of the visualization of the past. So please join me in welcoming Nicola.
All right. It should be on, yeah. All right. So let me start thanking everybody for being here today, as well as our web audience. I also wanted to thank Yvette Subramanian and Camille Crittenden here at CITRIS Berkeley for organizing this event and having me here. as well as UC Merced CITRIS director, Professor Joshua Viers, as well as all my colleagues at California State Parks for being wonderful and great collaborators and allowing us to do research in their beautiful parks. I wanted to give you a little background about myself and my research interest. So I joined the faculty of UC Merced in 2015. And then in March 2016, with Professor Marcelo Kalman from UC Merced and Professor Arnav Jala from UC Santa Cruz, we got awarded a CITRIS seed grant to start a new project on emerging technologies and heritage. I've been working with digital technologies as well as remote sensing for many years. But in the last couple of years, my focus switched to commodity VR for outreach and using visualization for reconstructing the past, as well as in this last year, thanks to CITRIS funding, using also augmented reality as a way to create cultural awareness, involve the public and visitors of museums and parks in heritage preservation. I've been developed before serious games for heritage in a previous project in collaboration with California State Parks in 2012, the Fort Ross Virtual Warehouse. And then this project is somehow a continuation of that work with just a different platform, different media, and different research questions. I wanted to give you an overview of today's presentation. I will talk about heritage at risk to make everybody comfortable with this topic, and then as well as see how internationally this topic is discussed. Then I'll talk about how technology has been used in the last 20 years for heritage preservation and historic preservation, as well as in archaeology, conservation, and documentation of heritage sites. Then I'll jump into discussing digital emerging technologies like augmented reality and virtual reality and mobile devices for outreach and as well as creating communities of users in parks and museums. Then specifically, I'll talk about my Bodie project, the Bodie Digital Community project. And then that would be a way we can discuss on the social role of technologies, especially emerging technologies like mobile technologies, for creating a citizen science initiative like the one we are planning to do at Bodie. And as well as a next step in my research and for this project and how we're planning to move forward after this startup phase funded by CITRIS. So in general, when scholars in heritage, in heritage studies or in historic preservation talk about heritage in danger, they may refer to what UNESCO, the United Nations Agency for Education, Science and Culture, define heritage in danger. There is a specific component of the World Heritage List listing every year sites in danger. And I thought it was good to start from a map, since, I mean, of course, trying to make my presentation as visual as I could, but as well as to see some data about heritage in danger. It's interesting to see how the majority of sites within the World Heritage List that are in danger in 2016 cluster around the southern Mediterranean shore, southern Eastern Mediterranean, as well as Arab countries. But this picture doesn't tell enough about how heritage is at risk. It doesn't tell, for instance, how climate change and global warming, sea level rise, as another phenomenon like wildfire threaten heritage places in places like California, where there is no red dot. Basically, there are no World Heritage sites at risk. So starting from this map, I'll lead you through like a couple of slides and a conversation on see how heritage is at risk globally. For instance, it's been in the news, unfortunately, for many years now, the destruction, intentional destruction of heritage portrayed by fundamentalist groups, for instance, in the Middle East or in other parts of the globe. It's been like a terrifying learning from the media about what happened to the site of Palmyra in Syria in 2015. The international community tried to react. There was a public outcry, but maybe it was not enough. What is interesting is many different stakeholders, including international institutions as well as researchers, private foundations, started to use new emerging technologies like crowdsourcing to try to mitigate this loss. A project I wanted to point out is the New Palmyra project, where basically a group of international stakeholders are collaborating to collect data about the heritage that was lost at Palmyra and try to reconstruct it and then create 3D models to show how the buildings were, as well as organizing workshops and then other outreach activities like physical actual gatherings to teach about the importance of preserving heritage. This type of approach is not new. In the early 2000s, ETH Zurich did a wonderful project on the Bamiyan Buddha's statues. They were destroyed by the Taliban, using photogrammetric reconstruction and also gathering images from the web, and also from people contributing with their own personal images and collections. As well as, I wanted to mention the Virtual Museum of Iraq project created by the Italian National Council of Research, which is basically try to provide a mitigation and then gather data and again give back to the Iraqi people part of their heritage that was stolen from the National Museum in 2003 after the invasion of Baghdad. And then again, the Project Mosul, now called the RECRAE project. It's another great example from one of my colleagues, Matthew Vincent and Chance Koganor, who are scholars in Europe, and then they try to create a web platform, again, to collect images about heritage that was destroyed in northern Iraq, again, by Islamic State, and then recreate these structures that were lost, and create also awareness in the public at large. As I said, the destruction of heritage is something that is not new. It happened historically throughout the millennia, especially in the event of war. But what happened in the 20th century, this became also a political, very strong political statement. For instance, in China, the Cultural Revolution, in very few years, probably in 2 years, destroyed a large amount of sites and collection and artifacts because they were not part of the communist ideology. I already mentioned the Bamiyan Buddha's example, destruction of giant statues in the Bamiyan Valley in 2001, as well as many other natural events and hazards happening, like earthquakes. But especially for California, we should be aware of sea level rise in changing the way we can access, especially coastal heritage sites and park in the future. Or other example like the Mono Basin case study, where basically showed how man-made disasters or occurrences can also damage California heritage. Mono Lake was, like the Mono Basin became part of the California aqueduct system. And then in just 20 years, from the 1940s to the 1960s, the level of the lake dropped more than 50 feet, causing tremendous harm to ecosystems, reproduction ecosystem, many animals, and as well the population living in the Mono Basin area that is a high Sierra desert, and became even more dusty and even more hazardous to people as well. Before jumping into my project, I wanted to give you some other example of great initiatives of digital technologies applied to heritage preservation. It seems that crowdsourcing is becoming very big. It's becoming a kind of like a paradigm for people working in this domain. And the work of Steve Savage at San Diego and Arizona State, it's a great example of how technology and the contribution from many, many people can help us monitor sites. Again, since the geopolitical context in the Middle East, Steve decided, in collaboration with ASOR and other foundations, to work on specific sites in Lebanon, Syria, and northern Iraq, and then involve the crowd in monitoring sites that would be too much to monitor for a scholar like him or just a small group at ASOR. For instance, this platform allow people, after logging in, to participate in a private mission, so the heritage sites are not at risk, so their location is not disclosed. And then basically there are like a number of observations that users can do, for instance, identifying looting, military construction, modern settlement, expansion of orchards and other economic activities, creation of like roads, bulldozing and so forth. And then using just publicly available imagery on Google Earth and Google Maps, basically the CITRIS platform allows people to pinpoint on a map in an area of interest of more or less a kilometer from a seed point on a site, what activities are happening. For instance, I'm doing this with a class of students, UC Merced, and then with just a very few weeks of training, undergraduate students can contribute to a very large cause, like monitoring a heritage site from looting, for example, in the Middle East. It's very stunning to see an image like this, the site of Apamea in Syria. So before 2014, when Islamic State conquered the area, the site, like the landscape looked like this, very green with archaeological remains. And then all the white and black dots are basically pits, illegal excavation activities done by Islamic State or local population forced by Islamic State to do so for retrieving artifacts to sell on the black market. In general, digital technology has been used in digital archaeology, documentation of heritage site, conservation, architecture for very long, more than 2 decades. Specifically, my work at the UNESCO site of Çatalhöyük helped me develop a set of skills and knowledge that I also apply in the CITRIS project. I've been using terrestrial laser scanning for monitoring the decay of the site through time, and then detecting the loss of material and the erosion of mud brick and plaster features over time. This is an example of a point cloud with it's kind of dark, but you can see some basal erosion here at the bottom of the walls. And then we detected through point cloud comparison in this image over here, where you see green and yellow, you have a loss of about 2 to 3 centimeters of material just in a time span of 2 years. This type of erosion happened because there is a lot of moisture coming from the ground. And the moisture starts a cycle activating soluble salts that in the spring and wet season they are like liquid, and then they solidify again in the dry summer. They expand, and then basically they destroy the wall from inside. And then this year we actually try to quantify the content of moisture using multispectral imagery, and this is an example of the same wall in Building 5 in the north area of Çatalhöyük. And then the goal, for instance, in this project is to use all these quantitative methods to create like spatial models of the decay, as well as predictive modeling, and trying to see how the site will decay and where the limited resources we have for conservation, for physical conservation, can be allocated to protect specific buildings or specific walls that are more likely to fall apart or be eroded in the future. So all this data we collect at heritage sites in archaeology and cultural resource management can be visualized because most often they are 3D data. Virtual reality has been a great technology, especially with the latest development in the last couple of years, becoming very affordable and also very usable by users and the general public, by students, and the general public. For example, head-mounted displays, and now at a consumer grade, there are many of them available, or other like desktop VR tables, allowing us to work on 3D modeling as well as analyze our 3D data in a more spatial way. Or immersive VR technology, like the one we built at UC Merced. It's called the Merced Wide Area Visualization Environment, or WAVE, that we built in collaboration with Thomas DeFanti at UC San Diego and Qualcomm Institute, which is basically an array of 20 4K displays mounted in a half a pipe structure. and then allows us to discuss the data, share data with other similar facility, like the WAVE they have at the Qualcomm Institute at San Diego, and basically have a sense of scale and speciality of our data that is not like it's not available on a computer screen or on a 2D surface. Augmented reality has a great potential as an emerging technology for museums and parks. And more cultural institutions and other institutions managing natural cultural properties are using augmented reality instead of traditional audio guides and similar devices. They were also costly to maintain, while augmented reality nowadays happens on the user's mobile devices. We've done some experiments in Turkey, but the focus of my work on augmented reality is California. It's a Bodie State Historic Park in the eastern Sierra Nevada. And what is great about augmented reality, it really allows people to learn more about the site they are visiting. They can be engaged in gamification activities like the one I will describe later in the slides, as well as learn through, learn by doing, like tasks that have been assigned to them, or contribute to, for instance, citizen science initiative like the one we established in the community, in the Bodie Digital Community project, where basically we're asking visitors to contribute to the monitor of the site somehow without even paying too much attention to the data they collect, because they basically are playing a game. But then this data, after being recorded, transferred to our server, they are vetted by experts, and then they become part of our daily monitoring throughout the summer of this building using structure for motion techniques, which basically we use to create the 3D models that then we later analyze. I mentioned before serious games, which is the last piece of emerging technology I wanted to discuss before jumping to my project. Basically, serious games are games that are not meant just for entertainment. There is, of course, an entertainment component being games, but then a more serious scope or domain usually is applied to this type of applications. And then here I wanted to mention my work for Ross, as well as another project that I conduct in collaboration with Duke University, which is called, and Christine Lenzoni. And the game is called Venice Virtual World, reconstructing early modern Venice in the 1700s using virtual worlds, and also students building this system for us. Before discussing in details the project, I wanted to introduce my team. Marcelo Kalman, Professor of Computer Science at UC Merced, and Arnav Jala, Professor of Computational Media at UC Santa Cruz, and now moved to North Carolina State Raleigh. And as well as a group of students at the undergraduate and graduate level, Graham Baird, Jed Abuelson, Renato Farias, Justin Nguyen, Hope Hutman, Nick Harlock, and Jayden Kochara, who throughout the spring and summer contributed a lot to this project. So I really wanted to mention their work here. My work at Bodie started before receiving an award from CITRIS. So in 2015, we had a planning phase, as well as a preliminary fieldwork season of just a few days. And then we tested data capture technologies like small UAVs, as well as laser scanning to detect these vernacular wooden structures at Bodie. Our work was not focused on the core of town. We work in the hillside of the park, where visitors are not allowed. While this year, when we went back with the CITRIS grant, we actually did work in the core of Bodie, in the streets that usually are full of visitors in the summer. In October, we displayed, on October 14th, we had a preliminary meeting with the California State Parks to share our data with them, because we want that our 3D data, as well as the augmented reality app we're developing, is scientific and also vetted by experts like state archaeologists and historians. And then we are planning to continue developing this application throughout the winter and spring, and then deploy the augmented reality app at Bodie in the early summer, and then do some testing with users at the park in the peak season, which is between June and September. Just to give you some background, historical background about Bodie, it's a very interesting place in a beautiful part of California, the Eastern Sierra. And then Bodie, it's special because basically is frozen in time. The buildings that we have now, we have more or less 150 buildings still from the gold rush era. Survived many fires, for instance. So again, fire or wildfire is a big hazard in that part of California, especially for this type of structures. And then here you can see the historic fabric and cultural landscape of Bodie with mining facilities on the bluff and also on this part of the park, and then many other structures and buildings in the valley. What's interesting, and probably that drives visitors there, is this state of arrested decay that many buildings at Bodie are. A wonderful team of maintenance staff from California State Park, as well as the Bodie Foundation, are contributing daily to protect this building and then maintain them, fix them every day. And then this is very unique, and then a lot of visitors from California, as well international visitors, go to the park every year to see these buildings. What we want to do is basically have them help us collect data on on monitoring these buildings in a fun way, because this is a daunting task. We cannot be there, my team cannot be there every summer, every day, taking pictures or flying drones and so forth. Of course, these activities have strict regulations and then are also expensive. While the crowd, visitors are there almost every day throughout the summer, and then also late spring and early fall. So we were trying to put together an application that allows us to collect data and then transfer that automatically to our local server as well as server at UC Merced. This is like an example of the road system at Bodie and as well as where the buildings are located. This is the cemetery where many of the people living at Bodie were buried. And then this is part of the park close to the public. The park is way larger than just this picture. Because in the 1990s, part of the land surrounding the park that was managed by the Bureau of Land Management was acquired by California State Parks because there was an attempt from a private company to restart mining activities at Bodie, and this really created like a public outcry. And then finally, in 1994, with the Bodie Protection Act, the area has been preserved for a generation to come, as well as for us to enjoy it today. But what's happening at Bodie is like the fragile structure, like wooden structures of this building are at risk. A couple of years ago, there was a wildfire that reached an area very close to Bodie. Fortunately, it didn't get into the park. But what is going to happen to the park in case of something like that? It's even on a larger scale with like a severe drought condition that we have in that part of California. How can we reconstruct the park, or how can we tell the stories of Bodie people and then what happened there to our children and youth? So our work is kind of a mix of historic preservation using digital technologies, as well as trying to create a constituency, especially in the youth, that is committed to ask our legislators and then our other stakeholders to commit resources to places like Bodie, because the current funding is not enough to maintain these structures. So we need more funding, we need more people skilled and more skilled people trained to work on this physical restoration, as well as we need more funding and more public attention to the park. So in general, the park, I think we need to mention that is very relevant to California history as well as heritage, because in the area there was a strong Native American presence before the mining started, as well as during the mining started. But visitors going today at Bodie, they won't find almost any trace of Native American sites. Our app will guide them through part of the park, which sometimes are not visited because they are not standing buildings, where user can see at least the areas without identifying sites that need to be protected where Native Americans were living, and specifically Northern Paiute and Mono Lake Paiute Indians. As well, there was a large part of town that was a Chinatown, as in many mining towns in California. And then what you see now at Bodie is mostly not telling the full picture of this town, because the Chinatown burned in 1892, and then it was never reconstructed. So our historic narrative will tell also the story of Chinese people at Bodie, engaging the public in a fun activity, basically trying to help us discover what happened, why the fire of 1892 destroyed a good part of town. As well as, I guess, Bodie is relevant to today, like heritage narrative and a discourse on heritage, because it's a place at risk where climate change is showing drastic effects, especially in terms of drought and risk of fire. So allow us to tell these stories and try to focus people's attention on these issues. These are some of the data we collected in the summer. So we scanned a number of buildings, including the Hoover House, the Railroad Depot, and Deschambault and Oddfellow Lodge. And then we flew small UAVs over town before, of course, the visitors were there. We were not allowed to fly during visitation time when the park was open. And then we were able to produce 3D models. Then they will visualize in virtual reality environments, as well as 3D models that will give to visitors to manipulate and interact with in the app. These are some other activities we did. Some of my students scanned cultural objects, both for preservation purpose as well as to make them available as targets in the app. The technology we're using for augmented reality is Unity 3D with a plugin called Vuforia. And then basically it allows both image target recognition as well as 3D objects as targets. But they need to be scanned with a specific app from Vuforia. And then this is what we did in the summer. And we produce, for instance, a couple of 3D objects. We scan more than 30 objects. And these are just renders of 3D objects, one-to-one scale, that can be 3D printed or visualized on the web. Some of the features I wanted to discuss that we plan for our app, of course, the image-based and object-based target, which I just mentioned. As well as the possibility for visitors when they just explore the park, which is one of the most fun things to do at Bodie, just going around and then discover historic materials, building, and so forth. We're going to leave targets on the floor, and in like wooden pedestals, they are now basically telling visitors what number of buildings they are looking at, so they can read a brochure. Provided by California State Parks. But our app basically will allow to do this in a digital way, and then having layers of information overimposed to what the camera in the cell phone is showing. We also plan a number of gamification activities. Basically, there is a narrative part of the game, so there is both a free roam experience and also a narrative experience we developed in collaboration with California State Park historians and archaeologists. And UC Santa Cruz, which is basically experimenting gaming technology like Twine and other web-based technologies for developing narratives to embed in our app, as well as to make available to the public as standalone web-based tools. In the free roam version of the game, like a video avatar will also kind of welcome the visitors in specific locations and tell the stories of the people living at Bodie, as well as of some of the buildings. And then we are just using a video avatar recorded on a green screen with actors. What is interesting that is basically somehow enhancing the citizen science part of the app, even subconsciously. Our app is recording the position of visitors every second, with an accuracy of about a meter level. And this will allow us to have a sort of like a back-end app that allows us to analyze the visitation of the park and then learn more about the visitor experience, where people cluster a specific time of the day, And then I have a couple of slides to discuss this, how we are planning to use this data and make them available to park managers. This is the flowchart of the visitor experience. So basically, when a visitor goes to Bodie, usually they go to the visitor center. And then at the visitor center, there will be a local Wi-Fi where they can download the app. And then there is a short tutorial they have to complete before starting. Basically, very simple, showing how to recognize a target and then scan a target. And then at that point, they have to, there are two options: to do like a narrative visit, in which basically there are gamification activities and a game, or just going around on their own throughout the park and then learning about the history and history fabric of Bodie, just scanning targets and learning about those places. Then basically we develop a system based on rewards. We're planning to give like small rewards, like in terms of like historic imagery or other images provided by photographers and people helping the foundation fundraising, or like 3D models of buildings we scan that can be 3D printed, for instance, as well as digital badges, physical badges, and other type of merchandise that the visitor will collect after finishing the game when they go back to the visitor center. When they go back to the visitor center, the application will be aware of the position, and then it will download into our server the pictures the user took for us. For instance, part of the historic narrative is basically try to discover or help the sheriff. Basically, the narrative happens in 1892, so it's kind of like traveling back in time. And then the visitor is helping the sheriff try to learn more about what happened and why Bodie burned. So users will use their phone to collect evidences, of course, with some freedom. And then these images that we will collect, that will be taken by the visitors, will be processed by my students and then vetted by experts to be used for monitoring the decay of buildings. This is the work of Professor Kalman and Renato Farias, one of his PhD students. So basically, like beyond developing an augmented reality app, we're also planning to have a Windows standalone app for park managers, where all this data logging and all this geolocation data we collected, as well as in the future, we might expand this also to demographics and other information that users want to share with us to learn more about who's going to Bodie, what type of background they have, what type of experience they're looking for. But especially the geolocation data are relevant to what we want to do because they allow us to, for instance, predict what will happen at Bodie in case of fire, or maybe optimize the design and the maintenance of paths to avoid erosion for multiple people walking along the same path in the same season. We have about 1,000 to 2,000 visitors in the weekends at Bodie during high season. So there's quite a bit of an impact, especially on Native American sites, if people just like take random paths and then will start walking over the archaeology or potential sites. So some of the techniques Kalman and Renato Farias want to use, of course, are based on path planning and analysis. And then they're helping us as well in creating like automatic paths for visitors. Like assuming you go to Bodie and only have like 1 hour, one of the options in the free roam part of the app is to pick through like a predetermined, pre-created path that will basically take you and see the most interesting places at Bodie and buildings as well. In that time, and that time is calculated by the backend part of our project, and then is displayed on the map live in the app. Here are some of the visualizations of the data that my colleagues at UC Merced are working on, and then it's very interesting to play with the scenarios that we are providing them through creating 3D models of the buildings as well as of the paths, and then see how people would react in case of an evacuation or where people would go given their position and the constraints in the environment. And then I guess this is particularly relevant in what we want to accomplish, because this it goes beyond to the single park. So if this application from the prototype phase that we are currently, and then we'll also deliver through the CITRIS funding, will become later an actual consumer product, this could be a great way for California state parks and other institutions managing places and natural and cultural properties for learning more about how people interact with their properties, as well as how to manage the crowd in case of emergencies. I mentioned that our work is basically a prototype. We're planning to deploy a working application in the early summer. We want to run user studies at Bodie with actual visitors and also with local staff next summer. But then we are currently seeking for additional funding for making this an actual product that will be available on the Google Play Store and Apple Store in the future. Ideally, also, we want to make this as a template that can be scaled up and then used in many, many other properties that California State Parks manages. They have more than 280 parks. So that we can improve our technology and also study more heritage sites, as well as create constituents of people managing and, helping monitoring as well as managing parks through their contribution. Here I put some other ideas that I'm currently pursuing in my research. Basically, we are trying to create a network of UCs working with California state parks, and like my work for now has been mostly focused on the headquarters center and Sacramento and the service center, and then basically Central and Northern California. But then there is another service center in San Diego that could work with UC San Diego, for instance, or UC Los Angeles, and then do other experiments like this in other parks. We're trying to leverage the Pacific Research Platform, which is basically a hyperspeed network that connects the 10 UC campuses and other research institutions in California and throughout the Pacific. And this will help us, for instance, use computational facilities we currently don't have at Merced, like the San Diego Supercomputing Center, and then render in real time our models or our huge collection of images produced by our apps and by the crowd, as well as by my students, in a way faster way that we could just do with our cluster at Merced. And then we also try to collaborate with California State Parks to find out how to create a 3D repository for all the 3D objects and cultural objects we're creating to make available to the public, as well as best practices to use digital technologies for heritage preservation. And the idea is to link more and more parks, as well as other facilities like the Statewide Museum in Sacramento, where there are beautiful cultural objects that are often not displayed, or not entirely, as it happens in many, many museums, that only a fraction of the collection have enough room for being displayed. And this is my last slide, and I would like to thank you again. And also, if you have any questions or suggestions, I'll be happy to respond and be here for another 10 minutes.
Any questions? Please use the mic. Do you have any questions? Here.
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much. I was curious if with this persistent, or not persistent, but surrounding of digital information that the visitor is immersed in, what about the visitor who wants to get away from computers and cell phones and just wants to get out there and be kind of free and casual and all that? Is there a way in which these visitors are sort of, and their intentions are kind of, let's say, denigrated or pushed aside, so that maybe there's a disappearance of signage that says, physical signage that says this is this building, this is what that does. Is there a danger of that, do you think? Thank you.
Yeah, I guess, it's a good question, and I understand that could be a concern to the public. but we are not planning to remove any signage from the site. We're just trying to create an extra layer of information for visitors. And then also, of course, using the app is completely voluntarily. And we're just seeing a lot of visitors going to parks and using their smartphones a lot for taking pictures. So then the idea is like, why don't we try to use those pictures? I mean, besides for social media and talking with our friends about the places we go, for a more scientific cause, creating this citizen science initiative. And the goal, I mean, is to create cultural awareness. So I think is also a noble cause. And of course, visitors can decide to use or not to use these technologies. It's completely up to them. But especially, we see young people very engaged. And then this is an important thing because they will be the stakeholders of tomorrow, helping California institutions to maintain these parks and preserve heritage. So if we are not engaging the public today, what's going to happen in 30 years, right?
Any other questions up here?
Hi, can you tell us what's been the reaction amongst the archaeologists to having these new, do they see this as a contributor to their sort of public outreach efforts, or do they see this as a serious effort towards archiving or generating data? Because I'm wondering if just the kinds of data that you collect here are squishy in a sense. They don't fit well with the way archaeologists normally collect data.
Right. I mean, it's not remote sensing or laser scanning, for instance, with that type of accuracy. I mean, we are collaborating with California State Parks. We have a great support from the headquarters as well as from the district, the Sierra District. So our app and then our work is completely vetted by them. We've been working with them also to collect objects and then also train them in using these new technologies to continue and expand this work of digitization of their collections. Some of the objects I showed were scanned, digitized in September. And then some of them are not available to the public to see, right? Some of them are in glass displays, some others are in the depot. So I think this could be a great way, digitizing this collection, to make them available also to scholars, students, through web-based platforms, where they can, for instance, take measurements, compare them, see patterns, and maybe writing dissertations if they're students on these collections that sometimes are not accessible or not that easy to access. So we have the backing of the local staff at the park, as well as other state archaeologists.
Okay, question
here. Thanks, Nicola. As an archaeologist, I have a question about kind of the tactile nature of things. So the things we like is to actually touch what we found and what we're, and even as a citizen, finding historical things and touching them. Is there anything happening in either augmented reality or VR that you think will get us to that point where there's something approaching kind of the tactility of what we're looking at?
Yeah, I mean, there is a whole field of haptic devices that they simulate touch. Of course, the materiality of things, it's very hard to replicate unless you reproduce the objects with replicas. One of the things that 3D models allow to do is also enabling 3D printing of these objects. And I think it's very interesting, especially for kids, going to a museum and having the possibility to touch objects that before were in a glass case display. Of course, the materiality of those replicas depends on the amount of funding and 3D printers you have available. But then if you have metal objects and some other type of objects can be replicated, as well as pottery. Or even just using polymer resins or plastic. At least the shape and then some qualities are still maintained and colors. I guess there is a risk that there's a dematerialization of culture poses to our society at large, but I don't think that this risk is posed by application like this of augmented reality that are meant for engaging the public and having the public participating more in protecting heritage.
Okay, we have one more question.
Hi, thank you. You mentioned repositories, and I'm wondering about the longevity of these models. I was thinking of some of these 3D projects in the 90s are already, unrunnable. Second Life and projects like that have become commercial. So I'm wondering what your plans are for long term. Thank you.
Yes, there is a big discussion in the field of heritage studies as well as engineering applied to heritage about mass digitization. I just went to a conference in Europe organized by Eurographics, where there was actually a panel and a lot of people discussing technology that allow us to digitize a lot of artifacts at once, like hundreds of thousands of objects per year, or even millions of objects. And then, of course, the concern is how we store this data, what type of format we use, what type of metadata standardization we use to link data to them. There are several initiatives that allow us to use open formats. There is a big concern also among institutions in funding projects like this, because they say maybe in 10 years the 3D technology we'll have will be completely different. Or maybe we'll be talking about holograms and no longer about 3D models. So it's a good concern that scholars in my field are trying to address, as well as many engineers. But I guess the value, at least in terms of outreach, in terms of open access to these collections, is very important. So maybe the format for the 3D models will change over time. Probably the precision and accuracy of this data may change. But then if we structure well our databases, our systems, and we make this collection available, I guess this does a great contribution to our society at large, in general. Oh, and of course to the scholar community and students, and in general the public, to access this collection that usually are closed or underground.